I spoke a little earlier with BBC World Service political correspondent Rob Watson for his thoughts on the Prime Minister's first address.
I guess what it made me think of, Gemma, was all the 6 predecessors who I'd seen give incredibly similar speeches promising hope, change, optimism, renewal, restoring trust with the people. And I don't mean to sound cynical by saying that, but I went back on some of the speeches that I'd heard in Downing Street over the last 10 years and that extraordinary turnover of promise of prime ministers. And absolutely, I was struck by the similarities, that hope that you have when you first enter Downing Street, and then, of course, a realization of how it has ended for his 6 predecessors.
Yeah, I guess, he would have to be acutely aware of that. Is that why you think this cost of living relief that he's going to be announcing, it's going to be coming soon?
Absolutely, it's going to be coming in the next few hours. But it's also why it's accompanied by, it's on the one hand, it's that sort of practical thing. Don't worry, in the short term, I'll do something to ease your pain. But again, to try and mark himself out, I suppose, from the 6 predecessors is to make the most extraordinary, the boldest of promises, to say that we are going to have the biggest change, political and economic, in Britain that we've had in 40 years under Andy Burnham, in a 10-year plan, which is an extraordinary thing to say, Gemma. If you think about it, we've had Tony Blair, we've had Margaret Thatcher, real political giants. So yeah, it's an interesting combination, sort of short-term fixes of your pain, but longer-term vision.
And new leader, new cabinet appointments. What were the more notable ones?
So I'd pick on just one, actually, and that is Ed Miliband. And what's really interesting about Ed Miliband is what he was not picked to do, and that he was not picked to be the Chancellor, the Chief Finance Minister. And that's because I think Andy Burnham was worried that Ed Miliband, who's known as a bit of a lefty and a radical, I think he was worried that the bond markets, who lend Britain billions of pounds a year, would say, do you know what, I don't think Britain looks like a very safe bet. We don't need it to do any more spending and borrowing and taxing. And why I pick out on that, and what's so really interesting, and it's one of the many contrasts and contradictions, if you like, paradoxes at the heart of the Burnham project, is, on the one hand, he's setting out a kind of properly lefty, left-of-centre vision, saying, neoliberalism, these last 40 years, it's gone wrong, privatisation, deregulation, globalization, focus on the individual and markets. We need to turn all that over. But on the other hand, what's his most significant appointment doing? It sort of counters that. It's saying, right, I'm not going to put someone in there who might frighten the bond market. So I find that, it's one of the many fascinating sort of contradictions and tensions we've come across today.
Now, in terms of international relationships, we know there's been a phone call to Donald Trump, also Vladimir Zelensky, and also there's been congratulations from our Prime Minister here in Australia. We had a hint there from Andy Burnham that, the AUKUS Pact will all go ahead as planned. How do you think he will hold himself in those relationships on the international stage?
So I think the big thing to say, Gemma, is that sexy as it might be to say it, that the watchword in foreign policy is going to be continuity. There's going to be much more continuity than there is change. And that's not really surprising. Britain's foreign policy is determined by its interests, its geography, its history. So, absolutely, Burnham is going to prioritise helping Ukraine, good relations with the European Union, although not rejoining, Gemma. He's going to stress the importance of international community, international relations, international multilateral bodies like the UN. And of course, he will want to maintain Britain's close relations with the US and countries like Australia. So much more continuity. And again, really interesting about the Ed Miliband appointment. I think one of the reasons why he's appointed someone so senior, so practiced and experienced as Ed Miliband, is so as he doesn't have to worry about foreign policy, so as he can concentrate much more on domestic policy and cost of living issues, because he thinks that's what's really done for his 6 predecessors. Now, every Prime Minister says that, Gemma, that they want to focus on domestic issues, and it never turns out that way. But I think that's genuinely the plan.
And finally, Sir Keir Starmer, how did he hold himself with his effective goodbye there? What's next for him? And I guess, how do you think history will judge him as a Prime Minister?
It's a very good question. I was there and watching closely. It's extraordinary, isn't it, Gemma, the way all of these British politicians, maybe it's the same with Australian politicians, the moment when they seem most dignified and most authentic and genuine is that moment where everything is draining away from them. So that was very much Keir Starmer today. He was with his wife. I was there just outside Downing Street. They were saying goodbye to all their staff, and he said he was leaving with a smile and with his head up held up high. But I guess to answer your question, I think history will judge him in two ways. One, that he'd squandered this extraordinary majority that he got in an election 2 years ago, that he lost the support of his party and of the country. But I suspect history will also say he may not have been a very adept politician, but that he was fundamentally a man of some decency and integrity. And let's see, Gemma, ask me in a couple of years' time whether Labour MPs will either regret or feel glad that they carried out this coup against Keir Starmer.